I'm Reed, this is Crowdland Publishing, and today we are doing a deep dive into a very strange and very interesting character class, the Druid. Now, Druids are a class that is thematically based around flora and fauna. They're spellcasters who specialize in nature magic, i.e. they've got control over natural forces like plants, weather, terrain. That's their specific niche within the game. They have gifted influence over animals. They can also are the primary shape-changing class, which is a common fantasy for players. Sometimes they're flavored as priests, natural priests, priests of the wild. Sometimes they are just a different tradition than clerics. Sometimes they are more shamanistic. Sometimes they are more animistic. But always they are spellcasters with control over the natural world. Some good examples of pop culture druids are specifically Shapechagers. Players love shapeshifters. So first and foremost, any kind of werewolf, any kind of werebear character, probably going to be a druid. Beast Boy from DC Comics, I think sometimes called Changeling. He's on the Titans TV show. Druid, absolutely. Lady in Green from C.S. Lewis, druid. Those Harry Potter wizards, druids. Shapeshifters there's loads of them. You can find pop cultural examples anywhere. If you want to have more power over plants, if you want to have power over nature, you're going to want to have a look at characters like Poison Ivy and Swamp Thing with their ability to make the forest and the jungle come alive and attack people for them. Then you might want to have a look at druids as a rival priesthood or a rival magical order. And then you get characters like Radagast the Brown from the Hobbit films. You might get Willow from the film and the very strange books that followed it up. You might get Ged from Earthsea, who would be my favourite example of a druid magician who is all about nature and animals. And Britannia, if you've ever watched that very strange BBC show, has druids as a really wild, crazy order of feral magicians. Getafix from Asterix is also another example of a druid who specifically is about serving a tribe. So yeah, you're going to find these two complementary ideas that are at the heart of the druid, the shapeshifter and the nature magician. And that's probably going to inform you as a player and you as a DM as to what a druid looks like in your world. Historically, what examples can we have a look at? Well, druids were real. They were a class of people, a legal class of people in Celtic cultures, and they were kind of an academic class primarily. And they handled all disciplines of thinking. They were judges, they were doctors, they were storytellers, and they seem to have been priests as well. They were certainly the guys who performed the infamous Wicker Man sacrifices, which may or may not have been real, probably weren't real. And they were definitely involved in religious education at the very least. And they were specifically trained about transmigration of the souls, which was how Celts viewed the afterlife, rebirth, resurrection, reincarnation, that sort of stuff. So I would be very surprised if they weren't specifically what we would call a priest class. There are other kinds of native priesthoods that you might want to look at. The Aztec dynasties, they have nature priests who are very, very close to farming, who are very, very close to corn, and therefore the infamous Aztec human sacrifices are all around resurrection of crops. And that's why they're cutting out hearts, that's why they're ripping off skin, because that's what shucking corn looks like. You might want to have a look at Brahmins. You might want to imagine druids as wise women or cunning men out of more English and Western European traditions. What you're looking for are priest class and any kind of academic class that is specifically about intermediating between the human tribes and the natural world. And that's where you will find great inspiration for druids. So what drove your PC to become a druid? Were you born maybe with strange eyes, feral and yellow, and that was a sign that you were destined for the priesthood of the great goddess? Were you promised the caste of druids as an obligation? Are you maybe the third daughter of a noble family? Maybe it was an honor that you had to fight for, and that being a druid is a position of significant authority within your people. Maybe you were swapped to the Fae, and your abilities represent what you have learned in the Summerlands, training beneath Her Majesty Titania. Maybe you were a witch, and that you used to go and study with the strange old woman with the hut with legs when you were a little kid. Or maybe you're actually quite a sophisticated magician and arcanist, and you intellectualize your position as a druid, it's just another kind of magic that you have learned, and that you take great pride in not being one of those people out in the forest with the antlers on their heads. It's just nothing to do with you. It's all about brains for you. This is an important question for PCs to ask themselves, because it's an important world building tool. More than rogues, more than fighters who are going to fit in nearly everywhere, druids suggest that there is a tradition of magic that is different to clerics and different to wizards and warlocks and all the rest of it. It's technically it's divine, but it might look very, very different to what the church looks like. Your position within the druidry is important for you as a character. It says a lot about you, and it says a lot about the world and the context of your character. Have a think about it. Talk to your DM. What does druidism mean to your PC? Now, how did you get these powers? Did you study for them? Were you born with them? What is druid magic in your world? What does it look like? You could be a priestess of Kybel, the god of growing and farms and rebirth. You could be a priest of Shapechagers, the flayed one, the god of corn, who of course is pretty big on human sacrifice and terror, and they used to dress in human skins. They were pretty scary guys. Maybe shapeshifting is a gift that's given specifically to druids, and whatever the druid class represents, as again a mediation between the human world and the animal world. Maybe the cat lord has given you this power. Maybe the sheep god. Is druidism maybe a gift from elves? Do you have to go and specifically go to their strange sylvan cities deep in the forest and learn their specific kinds of magic? Maybe you are practicing fairy magic, and you have, as a child, had to go into the other world and you came back fully trained as a druid. Maybe all druids are that. Who taught you then? Was it a Fey Lord? Was it a magician on the other side? Was it another druid? Where do these powers come from? Maybe they don't come from anywhere. Maybe you don't belong to a priest class or a social class or a kind of caste. Maybe your powers have to do with your ancestry. Maybe you are like a sorcerer, but your green dragon mother represents nature magic. Maybe you are the daughter of a nymph. Maybe you were just spontaneously generated by the forest who needed someone again to mediate between those two worlds. You don't have to just be a hieratic robed figure who's always get out of my forest. You can be so many different things with this particular set of magical powers and abilities. So what then does your druid look like? Well, maybe more than any other class, druids wildly vary by their archetypes, by their subclasses that they pick at level 3. A fighter is always going to look like a fighter. A monk's genuinely always going to look like a monk. And a wizard is usually going to look like a wizard, no matter what the specialization is. But druids, they have different areas of control, they have different interests magically, they have different abilities. You need to be aware of that from day one to keep a continuity of character. Think about it from the very beginning. How does your magic look? A twilight druid might be all about darkness and the night and quiet. Maybe when you are making nature come alive, it's not so much nature as the shadowy undergrowth. Maybe your flame blades, a very classic, iconic druid spell, is not fire. Maybe it's cold, icy, the spaces between the stars. If you are heavily Fey themed, perhaps you might want to have a kind of stardust theme to your powers. Maybe you glimmer. Maybe it's rainbows and light and strangeness. Maybe when you transform into animals, your fur is unnaturally colored. You become a tiger, and that tiger is a vibrant purple. Things like that. Maybe shape changing is really where it's at for you. Maybe you really want to get into that as a character concept. So you don't just transform into various animals. You have to use their stats, obviously, but you can always just skin it as maybe when you are underwater, instead of becoming a shark, you become a hideous gill man. You're the creature from the Black Lagoon. You describe that business. Maybe when you are looking to become a bear, you transform into literally like a werebear, hunched over and huge. You always keep an element of humanity when you are shape-changing. Maybe you're just a wild, mad scientist and you are flavoring potions and injections and spells. You are a chemist. You are an experimenter on the human and the animal form. Good idea for a very horrible villain I would never ever use there. You could be a Mr. Hyde type. Maybe even it's all ray guns and devices in a more steampunk campaign. If you ever want to do that, we should talk about that one day, actually. Steampunk campaign. Anyway, maybe you are a bad guy. Maybe your druid powers are cruelty towards nature. It's you drawing lightning out of the sky unwillingly. It's you hideously transforming. When you cast summon animals, you are, come to me, creatures, serve me. You are a bad guy, and you have dominion over nature. You do not work with it. There's lots of ways to be a druid. And you should put some thought into being a druid, because they're a really, really fun class, and there's just so many ways to signify what the druid's tool set is. You could be a priest in training for your culture. This is a part of your responsibilities now. Go out into the world, learn what you can, and come back, and that will give you information to help to protect the mother goddess. Maybe you are, in fact, a naturalist. You are a very urbane David Attenborough type. Oh, yes, look, it's the wild owlbear in its native form. I must sketch it. That's always fun, and it always is great for a campaign where violence isn't so much an important part of it. Maybe you are arrogant. Maybe you come from a Celtic culture where druids are very, very high status, and you think that the rest of the party are your servants. Maybe they are. That makes for some fun party dynamics. Everyone really, really likes it when someone outranks them. Maybe you are the last of a shape-changing breed. So while druids already cover a lot of conceptual ground in the game, multi-classing really opens it up. Let's get into that. Druid Bard. Okay. Traditionally, druids and bards are very, very linked in Celtic cultures. To become a druid, you had to become a bard first, and that's actually reflected in first edition D&D rules, but we don't have to worry about that now. But if you would like to kick that old school flavor, that's the way to go. Or maybe you started out as a druid and you realized that you wanted to specialize in some kind of lore. Maybe you just decided that you wanted to sing to the animals beautifully, or that keeping the traditions of your people and culture alive was very, very important. Or Druid Barbarian. Now, druids are often, as we've talked about, a religious caste. So maybe that you were volunteered into learning how to be a magician for the good of the tribe first, but you really, really always wanted just to get into it with combat. Maybe you just are really, really fond of being a tiger or a bear or even a tyrannosaurus, getting into physical combat, so you want to take a few barbarian levels to demonstrate that you are a physical beast in many, many ways. Druid, then fighter. Interesting combination. I think that this would represent a specifically trained kind of special forces troop. You have learned the ways of magic, but then you are needed for the army, who is just operating deep behind enemy lines or in difficult terrain, so you take fighter levels to represent your training and ability to work with the army. Or you could just want to be quite an off-the-wall concept. Maybe you are a silverback gorilla who uses a mace. Maybe you are a wolf with a sword in its mouth, like, argh. Up to you. Druid paladins, right. Druids who view their mission as essentially religious, or at least in the service of the powers of nature, might decide that they wanted to take a few levels in paladin to represent that I am a holy warrior of the forest. Maybe you enter the service of a fairy queen. Maybe she says, now you are my knight, I need you to act like my knight. Or maybe you're a twilight druid, you specifically are dealing with the undead, and you just need a few more options when it comes to taking care of them bony skeleton bastards. Very, very good for a deeply undead themed campaign. Druid monk, I think, would represent that you are wanting to get more out of your shape-changing abilities. Say you are a tiger or a shark, and you want to really make your character about speed and mobility. A few levels of monk is really going to help make that tiger all over the shop. Maybe you're an octopus with a flurry of blows. I don't know. Maybe you want to show that the monk powers are part of your body warping and changing and becoming somehow not an animal, but something that's inhuman. This would be great if you wanted a biology style druid who injects themselves with medicines to transform themselves and to become much, much faster and more lethal than any regular human. A kind of feral berserker. Druid Ranger. Barely needs talking about. You hardly ever need to justify this. You start out as a druid and you just decide that you want to become better at operating within your environment and fighting within that environment. So if you are a druid and you are looking after 400 square miles of gnoll infested land, you just take ranger and you specialize in hunting down gnolls. Perfect. You actually become quite a scary woodland hunter in that environment. Druid sorcerer. Alright, so you are serving a god or a forest or nature or whatever, and it just grants you some extra powers. And you just say, no, this is part of my druid abilities. Maybe you are, again, doing with that, I was born this way. I'm not a part of a druid social class. I'm just a person who has been born with supernatural powers. So sorcery is just a way of continuing that theme. If you want to buff yourself, which is something that sorcerers can be quite good at, you could return to that theme of I'm injecting myself with this. Now I've got that full strength, whatever. That is my ability as a druid sorcerer. Very, very handy to really fine-tune existing character concepts. Druid warlocks. Man, I think this would be a really, really great, especially villain class for you. Maybe you are an evil druid and your patron is a dark tree at the center of the forest, or the witch queen of the fairyland, or the sorcerer king, and you are of a magical tradition that is in service of a dark and evil power, and part of that involves dominating the land and dominating nature. A great old one warlock, you might be a druid who primarily operates in hideous caverns filled with monstrous toxic mushrooms, or a slime-haunted forest, or a swamp that's entirely made of poison water and hideous miasmas. Or maybe you want to keep up that witch tradition, and your patron is the black man of the woods, and that while you started out as this nature witch, eventually you came into the service of something far, far worse. Druid wizards. Interesting combo. Druids can always be imagined as another spellcaster. So your druid wizard is just you specializing in different kinds of magic and expression of your growing artistry. 3, 2, 1. So there you go. Druids. Lots and lots of conceptual ground. Lots and lots of ways to be a druid. As a DM, you're going to want them because they really do say a lot about your world. As a player, this is just... people love to shape change. If you want to shape change, druid is the first port of call for you. And if you want to be about healing the land or even hurting the land, if you want to be a character with a connection to the natural world and have influence and control over that natural world, druids are the place to go. Please give me a like. It's very, very handy for me. Tell your friends. Thank you very much. I'm Christian. This is Crowland. See you next time.